one point, multiple churches across Europe claimed to have the foreskin of Jesus. The most famous ended up in a tiny Italian town, vanished in 1983, and might still be hidden there. In Assisi, you can walk right up to a display case holding Saint Clare's 800-year-old hair and fingernail clippings, and in Naples there's a vial said to contain the BLOOD of a saint. These are strange and disturbing relics that belong to the Catholic Church. So at one point in time there were over a dozen relics in Europe said to be the foreskin of Jesus Christ. The most famous version ended up in Calcutta, a small town just outside of Rome. The story goes it was stolen from the papal relic collection during the 16th century and later hidden by a monk in Calcutta, where it stayed for centuries. Every year on January 1st, the Holy Prepuce would be taken out and paraded through the streets. Some believed the relic had miraculous powers, others were just kind of put off by the idea of worshipping a severed piece of skin. The Vatican didn't like the attention it was getting and eventually tried to crack down on public discussion about it, even threatening excommunication for anyone writing about it. Then in 1983, it vanished. The priest in Calcutta claimed it was stolen, but no real investigation was done. Some locals think it was taken by the church to avoid more embarrassment. Others believe it was hidden again by someone in town. Either way, it hasn't been seen since. You can still go to the town and find people who swear they saw it with their own eyes, though. Saint Clare of Assisi was one of the earliest followers of Saint Francis and founded the Order of Poor Ladies, later known as the Poor Clares. She cut off all her hair as a symbol of her devotion to a life of poverty and faith. After her death in 1253, some of her followers held on to the little things she left behind, like strands of her hair, pieces of her habit, and clippings of her fingernails. These relics are now kept in Assisi, Italy, at the Basilica of St. Clare. If you go, you can literally look through a glass display and see locks of her hair and a few curled bits of fingernail in a decorated case. It's treated with reverence, but some folks find it kind of unsettling. There's just something a little jarring about walking through a grand cathedral only to come face to face with the preserved body parts of a long dead person. But this is nothing compared to the relics that I'm about to cover. Every year, people pack into Naples Cathedral to stare at a sealed glass vial of dried, dark red gunk. It's supposedly the BLOOD of Saint Januarius. He was a 3rd century bishop who was martyred during the Roman Empire's Christian crackdowns. Of course, the red stuff is all dried up now, but it is said to liquefy right in front of people. If it liquefies, it's seen as a good omen for Naples. If it stays dry, it's considered a bad one. There have been years where it didn't liquefy, followed by major disasters like earthquakes or disease outbreaks. Church officials don't officially say it's a miracle, but they also don't quite explain it. Scientists have looked into it and say it could just be a substance that reacts to movement or temperature, but no one's allowed to open the vial and actually test it, of course. Saint Catherine of Siena was a mystic, a political advisor, and one of the most influential religious figures of the 14th century. After her death in 1380, her body was buried in Rome, but her hometown of Siena wasn't too happy about that, so a few years later, someone decided to smuggle her head back. The story goes that her followers hid it in a sack and tried to sneak it out of Rome, but were stopped at the gates. They prayed, and when the guards looked inside, they saw rose petals instead of a human head. Miraculously, they were allowed through. When they got back to Siena, the petals had turned back into Catherine's actual mummified head. That head now sits in a glass case in the Basilica of San Domenico. It's been there ever since. Her actual face is dark, leathery, and shrunken, as you'd expect from something that's over 600 years old, but it's also encased in a really beautiful display, so it looks more presentable than you'd think a preserved human skull with some skin still clinging onto it would be. In the Basilica of Santa Sabina in Rome, there's a large black beat-up chunk of stone. According to legend, this is the very same stone the devil hurled at Saint Dominic while he was deep in prayer. The story says Satan, furious that Dominic was preaching and converting too many people, launched the stone at him inside the basilica. It missed, slamming into the floor instead. Supposedly, there were claw-like marks and scorched patterns left on the stone, marks that are still visible today. Whether those grooves are from claws or just the result of natural erosion doesn't really matter to the church. What matters is the symbolism. The devil tried to stop Dominic, and he failed. Ever since, the Devil's Stone has been kept inside the basilica. Beneath the floor of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, right under the massive altar, there is a small tomb carved into rock. Inside that tomb are bones the Catholic Church believes belong to St. Peter himself. The Apostle Jesus supposedly called the rock on which the church would be built. The bones were discovered in the 1940s during secret excavations ordered by Pope Pius XII. For years, their identity was kept hidden while researchers quietly tried to confirm if they were really Peter's. In the 60s, one archaeologist working with the project announced that they'd found evidence. The bones were from a man in his 60s, buried in a place marked with graffiti that read something like, "Peter is here." In 2013, Pope Francis publicly displayed the bones for the first time, 8 fragments held in a bronze box. But not everyone is convinced. There's still debate over whether these bones actually belong to Peter, or if they were even buried there originally. Some argue they were moved or planted much later on. Either way, the church treats them as sacred. They're not shown to the public often, and when they are, it is a big deal. St. Francis Xavier died in 1552 on a small island off the coast of China while waiting for a boat to mainland Asia. His body was buried in a makeshift coffin in the hot, humid ground, basically the worst place to preserve a corpse. But when his remains were dug up a couple months later to be moved, people claimed the body hadn't decayed, and that's when the story of his incorruptibility started. Eventually, his body was brought to Goa, India, and put on display in a glass coffin where it still rests today. The church calls it a miracle, a sign of divine favor. But depending on who you ask, the body doesn't exactly look untouched. Over the years, chunks have been removed for relics. His right arm is in Rome, his nose has deteriorated, and the skin is darkened and shriveled. But considering how old it is, I guess it's not the worst. It's definitely not mummified in the Egyptian sense, but it's also not a pile of bones. Pilgrims still traveled to see it, and every 10 years or so, the church would parade the body through the streets. That doesn't really happen anymore, but the coffin's still there, attracting people from all over the world who want to see the so-called miracle up close. This one sounds made up, but it is not. There's a church in Bethlehem, the Chapel of the Milk Grotto, that claims to be the spot where Mary breastfed baby Jesus. According to tradition, a few drops of her milk spilled onto the cave floor and turned the stone pure white. That stone, now considered holy, was ground into powder and given to pilgrims starting centuries ago. Today, they're still doing it, sort of. For about $2, visitors can buy packets of white powder made from the same limestone, blessed by monks, marketed as a kind of miracle cure. The idea is that if you mix it into water and drink it, could cure illness, infertility, or whatever else you're struggling with. It's not exactly FDA approved, but some people swear by it. The church doesn't officially say it's Mary's milk, but the legend is still very much present here. The Catholic Church has a thing for body parts, and St. Francis Xavier's arm is one of the more famous examples. This is the same Francis Xavier from earlier, the 16th century missionary, whose body is on display in Goa. His right arm, though, was chopped off and sent to Rome in 1614. Why the arm? Well, because according to legend, that's the arm he used to baptize more than 100,000 people. For centuries, the severed limbs sat in the church of the Gesù in Rome, perfectly mummified. The hand still posed as if mid-blessing. In 2018, the church allowed the arm to go on tour across Canada for the first time, and there were huge crowds. People waited in line for hours just to catch a glimpse of it in its glass case. Saint Datian isn't exactly a household name, which makes his relic even weirder. They're kept in the Church of the Most Holy Redeemer in Manhattan, a pretty unassuming place in the middle of New York City. Back in the 19th century, a wealthy Italian woman donated what she claimed were the bones of Saint Datian to the church. According to the story, Datian was an early Christian martyr killed during Roman persecutions. The bones are kept in a glass case under the altar, dressed in fine robes, resting on velvet cushions. There's no solid proof that the bones belong to him, though. In fact, there's always been this rumor they might actually be the remains of a 19th century New York policeman who died protecting the church from anti-Catholic rioters. There's no way to prove it, and the church hasn't exactly rushed to get the bones' DNA tested. Either way, the relics are still there, laid out like a saint from ancient times. Golden crown, embroidered clothes, and all. So with all that said, I've been your host James, and I'll catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.